All right, so the next thing we're going to want to do is pop this out in 3 dimensions. So what we're thinking is maybe the screen here might sit on the surface a little bit, so we might have a little bit of an edge to it. Other things, the scratches might be indented. And when it comes to the sand and the grunge, we might indicate those on the surface a little bit. Maybe not, though. A lot of the times when you think of like dirt on electronics or some sort of a surface, it doesn't really affect the form so much as it does just the specular. So mainly the indents are probably what we're looking at and the screen. So to get started with, I'm going to create a new document, just file new, and we're just going to set this to be 2048 by 2048, so it matches our document size, and hit create. And we're going to start with the flat value, which is 50% gray. So I can actually double click this default layer after unlocking it, do a color overlay, and set the brightness here to 50%. And that will give us the flat value. Then I could come into the robot color here and I could drag in what I need. So I'm going to bring in my rectangle for my eyes. So I'm just going to shift drag that in. And I'm going to bring in my grunge. So I'm going to shift drag that in. And that's really the only areas that are going to need any height information. So let's start here with the screen. The screen doesn't really sit that high off of a surface. So this might be something like 60%. That's a 10% raise. And let's go ahead and test that before we do anything. I'm going to do a file, save scene as. I'm not sure why it forgot where I was at, but it did. And we're just going to make this our robot bump and save. And from here, we can go ahead and come to our geometry file. We can go to bump mapping, and we can click the file here. Notice that the geometry is a new input here. We didn't necessarily have to do that in the last one. It was in the common section, I believe. But now it's in its own section called geometry. Something to be aware of is if you are looking in geometry inside of Hypershade, you will not find it. So if I scroll down here into the last category, which is geometry, notice there is no bump map here. This is one of those really weird discrepancies. I hope they change in future versions of Maya, but you actually have to apply your bump map through your attribute editor when using standard surfaces or AI standard surfaces. And it is very annoying because you also need to have this open in Hypershade to correct the bump 2D node. So let's go ahead and click that file there. Click file. And it's set to bump already, which is fine. Remember, you can either hit this over arrow to get to your file, or you can click on it here. I'm going to click this over arrow just to show you how it works. That way you can understand you don't really need to have Hypershade open. And then you'll see I'm in my file here. We can click our file to input this. And under robot, we'll go ahead and grab our bump and hit open. Now, something to be aware of, though, is notice, once again, the out alpha is what's mapping here. If you want to get a slightly more accurate result, you want to make sure alpha luminance is on. But notice, unlike the other inputs, this one is smart and it does it for you. Okay, so there we go. And you can see we can get an idea of our screen there. And we have a little bit of a bump going that indicates the screen is indeed applied. Now, we might want to make some changes to that because it's just a 90-degree angle. And it's currently pushing out. With how this is set up, if it's going to have a 90-degree angle, I might prefer the screen to push in. So rather than pushing out, let's go ahead and take this 10% in the other direction. So rather than having it at 60, let's set this down to 40. So this way it actually pushes in a little bit rather than pushes outward. And I think that would probably be better for construction equipment because that would give it a little bit of a protective casing. So you can see how that gives us that indication there. Now, we could experiment with this further, too, using layer styles. If you double-click here, there's a couple layer styles that might be useful. We could try something like a stroke, inner stroke, or outer stroke. So let's say we wanted to have like a little lifted outside. We could try a stroke here, and we can make this higher. So I can make this like 60%. And what that would do is it would make it go up first and then come down. So it would give it like a frame. I'd probably want to incorporate that into the color if I went this route, since it's probably not going to make much sense. But you can see we could get a little frame around the outside. I think I'm just going to let the screen sink in, though. We're going to get rid of that and call that good for now. And that way we just have a little indication that that screen's not perfectly flat on the ball. It catches the light a little bit there, and we can see those highlights on the edge, which looks nice. All right. The next thing is the metal. So I want the metal to be chunked out of here. So let's come up here to my grunges, and in particular to the metal, I'm going to hide everything else. The metals apparently are the exact same color here. I'm going to want these to be darker. I don't want them to be super dark. For the color overlay here, I might go ahead and set those to be 30. That'd be slightly deeper than the screen. Or I might even set them to be 45, which would just be slightly deeper than the surface. Let's start with that. And the reason why is I have a couple of these around the screen, and you wouldn't necessarily want this to be cut all the way down to the screen. So that, or I can make the screen deeper. Either one would work, but we can see how that looks at 45. And a lot of the times, this is really just subtle stuff. You don't need to go crazy with it. If I go ahead and double click there, you'll see, 45 was more than enough. We actually could probably get away with less. But you can see how that paired with the metalness really does give us nice indentations, nice little chips. So let's come back in here. Let's make this even more subtle. Rather than 45, let's just try 49 for now. Just one drop of one value. And with an object this smooth, one's probably going to be noticeable. I mean, we were only doing 5 originally, so you can imagine. And just double click. And you can see now how that just gives us a little bit of detail there and just chips in there nicely. So I think that looks a little bit better. I like the variation we're getting with it. And from a distance, it gives us enough of a breakup to look interesting. I might want to make the metals darker in there looking at this, or lighter. I'm not really sure yet, but I can always change that color to get something a little bit different. I might even push it to be lighter, closer to white, rather than that gray color, because it almost doesn't look like damaged metal. It almost looks like the paint's just kind of worn away. Other things we can introduce if we want to try it out is something like the sandy dirt. We could come in here, we could convert this to a white color again, and make this very subtle across the surface, but really nice breakup. This is currently at 5%. I'll go ahead and save. And what this will do is just make the surface imperfect across the board. You can see how crazy that looks. I might want to be a little bit less apparent with it. So if I set this down to 1%, for example, of the opacity here, and saved, we can't really see it here, but Maya will be able to see it. And you can see it gives us that variation, just kind of gives us a roughness across the surface. I could further do this by making this 1% to 50, and now we're getting into decimals of opacity. So I did 1% on the layer, 50% on the noise. I'm surprised that actually didn't change the way it looks. It could be because I have that color overlay going. Sometimes when you have color overlays, they overwrite things like opacity. If you right-click and do a rasterized layer style, it bakes that down, and then you're not prone to that anymore. So now if I do it, we might see this a bit clearer. All right, I have to take it even lower. 1% of 10%. I don't even know if that'd be noticeable. Yeah, so that's not noticeable. We could up that to 25. And basically just go back and forth until we have something that we like. And it could just be there's a certain threshold that it needs to hit. Unfortunately, bump maps are not that precise compared to normal maps, which we'll look at in a moment. It looks like this has some sort of a threshold that when it hits, it's just there or it's not. So I'll have to decide if I want this or not and commit to it. 35 seems to be the threshold here. And once we hit 35, it just goes nuts. Okay. Well, that's all right, because I do want that. Let's go ahead and make a mask to remove it from certain areas. I don't think there's a master to this. So I'm just going to bring the grunge up here, up top. And we'll just make this our noise. And now I'm going to bring in some additional information. So I don't want it on the screen. I don't want it on the metals. So I'm just going to bring in my metals here, just shift drag into this setup here. Make sure it's not in that layer. And I'm going to duplicate out this here. And then I also need to come in and I need to grab the metals. So I need to grab all of these, make sure that these are 100%. And I want to create a black and white mask. So I want to remove these. So I want all these to be black. I can just double click on these to turn them black. And this is going to act as a mask to remove these from the noise. With the rectangle, I can switch its color to be pure black. And then with the metals, I can double click these and set their color to be pure black with a color overlay. And then we can merge these all down. So I can go ahead and go from the top to the bottom, shift click, right click, merge layers. So we get those metals. I can create another layer that's white. So I'm going to create a fresh layer, fill this in with white, merge this, and we could just name this our metals mask. And from there, in this noise layer, I could group this, I could mask this, and then I could do an image, apply image, and apply my metals mask here, hit OK, and now we won't have noise in the metals. So if I go ahead and save, we'll have roughness going across our ball here in the plastic areas, but you'll see our metal areas will be free from that roughness. So now we get the idea of that being painted and these areas not. All right, so I think that's enough to kind of kick off my normal map initially. It doesn't look like there's much here, but there actually is quite a bit of information. We're going to look at how we can turn this into a normal map just to get a little bit better detail shortly here. But we want to start with a bump to get an idea of where we're going and to have something to convert. There's other areas we could consider, like the dirt across the surface, but like I mentioned, I don't think that's worth adding. We could also make some slight changes here to things like the robot color. For example, with the metals here, if I come into the grunge, I might want to change some of these and the metal variations. So we could double click these. I could also consider merging these. Actually, if I just right click merge layers, that will keep their masked information because it's already been removed, but now I can just do the color overlays together. And we could either go darker or lighter with this one. So we could try, since this is kind of stylized, going an even lighter blue. And usually scratched metal is lighter, not darker. So just be mindful of that. That's maybe a little bit too light. I could also experiment with going darker. Sometimes when you're doing stylized, the truth has to be distorted, so to speak. So it's lighter than the lighter area, lighter than the dark area, but darker in the light area. That might look better. I think that reads okay. A little bit too saturated. So let's desaturate that. Okay, and we can play around with that. So we can continue to adjust this and see where it gets us. But now that we have everything coming together, our character is going to be a lot better off. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not feeling the placement of those. I feel like I've committed to this too much at this point to turn back. Yeah, I don't know. I think the lighter gray color was working for us more than what we have here. Sometimes you just got to experiment. All right. Cool. No. You know what? I'm going to Control Z a bunch of times in here. All right. We're back to where it was. Let me go ahead and save that. There we go. I think I'll leave it there where we had it. It was good enough. And now we've incorporated our bump. So we have a little bit of detail there. We have our roughness. We have our metalness. You can see how this is all coming together quite nicely. So let's explore normal maps next, how we can convert this over, and then we'll do some finishing touches and we'll have a textured character that we can use. All right, so as a challenge, what I want you to do is go ahead and create a bump map. So think of what areas may be lifted or indented on yours. Yours may be different from mine. If you tried things like vents, you might have more indented areas or buttons or little cutouts. All sorts of little surface details can be turned into modeling information through bumps. In addition to that, incorporate your grunge in some way. Try getting some scratches and indents in there, maybe just a rougher surface, and maybe try using it to create surface variation like I have between the paint and the metals. All right. So with that, go ahead and pause, give it a shot, and then we're going to look at how we can convert this into a normal map and talk about what normal maps are, so that way we can kind of up our game moving forward.